Well, this week we heard a lot of news about businesses and about homes. So we're going to talk about businesses that are closing and one that's not closing, which usually isn't news, but in this case is. And then homes that are tiny and homes that are big. We'll get to all of those, and possibly we'll talk about education as well. We'll see what we can fit in. Okay, CinéArts, the business that's not closing. Janani, what was the announcement this week?
Yeah, the show will go on for at least 2 more years. This was obviously a huge news late July 20th around is when we found out that CinéArts is going to close its CinéArts theater right here in Palo Alto Square. And as everybody recalls, there was a huge community uproar, more than 2,000 people signed a petition. And then a few days ago, the city learned that the parent company of CinéArts, which is CinéArts based in Texas, has reached a deal with the owners of Palo Alto Square, in which it'll stay open for 2 more years, and it won't close in mid-August as was initially as they initially had planned to do.
What happens after the 2 years?
That is the big question. We don't know yet. There's obviously this agreement has no bearing on what happens then. I mean, we do know that there will be some improvements made to the theater. We do know that the site has to be a theater even after 2 years. So even if CinéArts leaves, another theater would have to come in because of zoning rules. But as far as whether this particular theater will stay after 2 years, that will depend on movie patrons and economic climate and whatever the terms of a confidential agreement are between Hudson Pacific and CinéArts.
Yeah, in the press release, it seemed that everyone was hitting the note of if the community steps up, if the community comes and
go see a movie.
Financially makes us viable. And that was kind of the reason that CinéArts, it was CinéArts that was the one that was going to pull out. It wasn't Hudson Properties.
Right,
Hudson
yeah, it was the
Pacific.
movie company. They said the economics have changed, so.
Yeah. So some people have raised the question of whether or not CinéArts will still be viable after the San Antonio Center in Mountain View opens its theater, which is going to be 5 times as big as this one. Of course, everyone in South Palo Alto, it's kind of equidistant whether you go to San Antonio or to Palo Alto Square. North Palo Alto may have a say about that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly what kind of movies will be screened at the new San Antonio theater, but CinéArts is known for like its art house flicks. I mean, I think they just started showing Snowden, which is kind of mainstream, but they also have like Cafe Society, the Woody Allen. They have a lot of like foreign movies. I remember seeing The Artist back here, and like there's. So if the San Antonio theater goes for like the popcorn blockbusters, there might be room for both of them to coexist. Because I know when I go to the Embarcadero Theater in San Francisco or to CinéArts right here, it's usually for a very different kind of movie than I would get in a multiplex.
Yeah, and they've hosted some film festivals here as well.
Yeah, that's an annual thing.
Okay, and did the city promise anything in in bringing these parties together, or since Hudson Pacific is renovating its space?
Hard to tell. I mean, from what the city says, this is a deal between the 2 private parties. I think the city's role in this was making it very clear that this will have to be a theater, which was kind of an open issue, I think, when this debate got started. And when the city's planning director and city manager said this will have to be a theater, even if CinéArts leaves, that definitely kind of puts more pressure on making this deal happen, because you can't just replace it with offices or any other like more lucrative use. Which wasn't suggesting Hudson would have done, but the fact that it has to be a theater definitely restricts options.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. And they're staying open, but a long-time retailer is going to close. And who is that?
Yeah, Keeble and Shuchat right here on California Avenue. Been there for 51 years, selling cameras, camera gear, giving photography classes, all kinds of stuff, and a real gathering place for the local photography community and beyond, just because of the few available camera retailers left in person. They will be closing at the end of October.
And is this a case of death by internet?
That's what the owner said. I talked with him yesterday, and it's not the typical narrative of death by landlord or high rents because he owns the building. So he was, quick to say that. But that's also kind of a sad reality that even with himself owning the building and not paying rent, they still weren't able to make it. He's just said with the changing industry and people buying stuff online or going to big box retailers for cameras, they're just getting less and less business, and it's becoming not, it's not profitable.
Not to mention the huge line of people lined up for the new iPhone 7.
Yep.
Which probably won't be needing Keeble and Shuchat services when
Yeah.
they get that.
Yeah.
It's like the theater trying to compete with Netflix. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, we're seeing both industries having trends that bring the ease and access to greater majorities of people and relying less. There was an interesting, quote though about how people may be buying cameras elsewhere, but they still need the expertise that the staff has.
Yeah, and I think of that kind of a place as somewhere I would go for that. I mean, that's what they have that you can't get. Even if you're going to read articles online and stuff like that that's available, or reviews of cameras, I still think of a brick and mortar place with salespeople like that as more trustworthy, and somewhere I would go for that kind of a help. But yeah, he gave an example of a woman who had bought a very high-end camera at Costco and it wasn't working, so she went there for help. And he said that happens frequently now.
Yeah. But so he missed out on the money that came from the camera purchase, but
Right.
yeah, it's not enough to survive.
Yeah.
He mentioned maybe bringing in a camera retailer.
Yeah, he said
That's just an idea.
he's put out some feelers, and that would be an ideal dream, but it seems unlikely. He said one person seemed excited, but it was very premature, and he did wonder, if we couldn't make it without having to pay rent, even if I sort of cut some sort of deal, it might be difficult for them to make it. And he did have this comment about he always wanted Keeble and Shuchat to be a pure camera shop, so he didn't want to sell. I don't know what else it would be that might be more profitable that people could come in and
Gift items?
Yeah, like
Churros?
stuff at the counter, or snacks,
Yogurts and
whatever. So
burrito.
he said, maybe if there's a place like that sells more than
Yeah.
cameras in a less traditional sense. That
yeah, I
maybe
wouldn't
they
hold
could
my
make
breath
it.
though, because whoever comes in would be facing the same exact challenges that he's
Right.
citing
Yeah.
for reasons to closing.
Yeah, are there other camera stores even close by on the peninsula?
There's
or
Mike's
south?
Camera in downtown Menlo Park, but it's a much smaller store. And he mentioned San Jose Camera, which I'm not familiar with, and they're also family owned, been around for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I was talking to our photographers yesterday. I think a big retailer in San Francisco, I forget the name, closed recently, so there are a few options up there.
Everybody's going online.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to go have an online business exclusively. He's just getting out of the.
Yeah,
business
it sounded like, and
entirely.
he said, we've changed our products and made various upgrades, and it just wasn't enough to make it.
Yeah. He's got a lot of space in that building, correct? He's not just the first floor, which all of us see, but and there's two locations. There's a
buildings.
second floor
Right,
at
yeah.
least. And
So the building at the corner of California Avenue and Birch is 16,000 square feet, and there's offices on the second floor. So he said, I would rent to a separate entity on the second floor. There would be offices, and then whatever is retail on the bottom. And then there's the second space across the street on Cal Ave that's a little bit smaller. It's about half the size.
so he's having a liquidation sale before he goes out.
He will, yeah. He hasn't figured out dates yet, but he said the next few weeks. So.
All right. Well, moving right along, we'll talk about space of a different nature. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg is trying to redo the 4 homes that he owns in the Crescent Park neighborhood. And he came in front of his representatives came in front of the Architectural Review Board yesterday, and they gave him a very interesting recommendation that was a denial, and it was just fascinating on so many levels.
I'm not sure if he would use the word interesting to describe it, but yeah, it was definitely surprising because, as you mentioned, he was trying to replace 4 homes. And what's unusual about this project is what he was proposing to add would actually be smaller than what he's taking out. So right now there's 2 2-story homes and 2 single-story homes. He would demolish them and replace them with 3 single-story homes and 1 2-story home. He also was planning. None of them were even close to the height limit. That wasn't an issue. They all had huge setbacks. There'd be expanded garden areas, more trees. Basically, city staff had no problem approving it, saying this is great. The planning staff in reviewing it complies with all that. And then which is why it made it surprising. When it got to the ARB, they looked at it, they considered what it would be used for, and then they voted to deny it, which
3 to 1.
3 to 1.
Thumbs down. Yeah, usually all of the projects that come before the boards that have some sort of controversy tend to have architectural compatibility, size, height, that kind of issue going on.
Right.
And this one struck me as being denied not because of what was going on in the outside of the house or surrounding the house or where the house was placed, but what was probably going to go on inside the house.
Right.
Or how it's going to be used, which raises the question of the ARB's authority and purview.
Right.
in examining this and giving a recommendation for denial.
Yeah, and I agree. It's very unusual for them to get into land use issues. And I think at one point when Wynn Firth, who made the motion to deny, was explaining her reasons, she said it basically comes down to how this is used, which is kind of like, isn't that the Planning Commission and the Council?
Yeah.
But she did back that up with pointing to specific design elements of various homes. And just to explain, the whole rationale was this is a single-family neighborhood, which means each of these parcels should be occupied by like an individual household, a family, however you define family, the city doesn't define it. But in this case, the way the buildings are designed made her and her colleagues, two of her colleagues, think that this is actually going to be a compound, it's going to be occupied by one person. Because of that, it violates the city's comprehensive plan. And one of the ARB's findings is the design is compatible with the comprehensive plan. That's finding number one. And so that's the one they couldn't make. And so, as you know, comprehensive plans like the Rorschach test, everybody's seen it. You could justify many things by pointing at it, and they used the way that the comprehensive plan treats single-family parcels as a reason to deny this one.
Yeah. So picking that apart a little bit. First of all, the wording is design. So the question is, what does design really encompass? Is the design just the outside, the face of the house to the street, because or how it affects the neighboring homes, because that's kind of affecting the character and compatibility of the neighborhood? Or does it go into how many people might be in the house, how it's going to be used? Maybe you can talk a little bit about the details of some of the homes themselves, like what is inside one home versus another.
Yeah, I mean, one of the homes proposed, which is the main residence, was supposed to have like a big entertainment area in the first floor, like a movie theater, kind of like a screening room in the bottom. Not huge. I think it would seat like 20 people or something like that.
Yeah.
It also had what looked like a service kitchen. That's what Wynn Firth said, not like a normal kitchen. So she pointed to these specific rooms, and there were other examples at other buildings. And she's basically saying, the way these are designed does not look like a family would actually be living there. It's not standard for like a family. The design suggests these are being used for a compound. And and you're right. Usually when they talk about design, it's things people can see, because many of the projects that are brought to the ARB are people appealing, like, giant houses or things that aren't fully compatible. So those are the things people care about. How's it going to stand out? But in this case, there was no opposition from neighbors or anything like that, and so they focus instead on the layouts.
How did Zuckerberg's, it was his architect, how did she respond?
She basically made a point that these are designed in a way that to accommodate families, and she acknowledged that they wouldn't be used for 4 separate families. So this would be her client, who was not named at any point in the meeting. He's got 4 different LLCs representing him, and he's got an architecture firm representing the 4 LLCs. So he's quite removed from this. But basically, she said, even though he'll be using this for his friends and family and whatever else he wants, they're designed in such a way that in the long term, any of these could accommodate a family in a traditional single-family household way.
Yeah.
So
There's some irony there with this term that Wynn Firth used, which was individual housekeeping unit. So
I love that term.
I found it really
intriguing. Maybe think of
intriguing.
Alice in the Brady Bunch. Yeah.
So I looked that up in the municipal code because I didn't know what she was referring to. So one of the definitions in the municipal code has to do with a family. So these are single family homes. Family means an individual or group of persons living together who constitute a bona fide single housekeeping unit in a dwelling unit. Family shall not be construed to include a fraternity, sorority, club, or other group of persons occupying a hotel, lodging house, or institution of any kind. And the reason I think that's ironic is because this definition of family seems to be trying to exclude like tons of people living in a house together. And if you have Zuckerberg and his wife and child and ancillary other people living there from time to time, it seems like it's kind of the opposite of this idea of let's not pack in so many people. And this definition actually, a separate note, seems to go against the Airbnb practice, which the city is not regulating right now.
But at the same time, the definition you just read, the very thing it excludes is the very thing we saw on Social Network when Zuckerberg had his friends over. It's very, very fratty.
the big frat house,
Maybe
Wasn't that in Palo Alto?
supposedly.
Yeah, theoretically.
Yeah, you could tell from the film that wasn't a Palo Alto house.
Right.
Yeah, but it's good to know that the city of Palo Alto's municipal code does define what a family is, which I didn't know.
Yeah, that's true. There's another issue that was raised also by Wynn Firth, I believe, which was the zoning is R1 parentheses 10,000, which effectively means that any lot could be between 10,000 or,
Yeah, I think that's the minimum lot size.
yeah, 10,000 and 20,000 square feet. All four of these lots are between 12,000 and 17,000 square feet. So they're comfortably in that zone. She was saying that an integrated parcel, effectively, an integrated use couldn't exceed 20,000, which is kind of the zoning code here. And so in
Right.
total, they're about 60,000.
Yeah, I think more than
Square
60.
feet.
I don't have the exact number, but yeah, basically there's two ways to look at this. I mean, the zoning district, the zoning code says these lots have to be at least 10,000 square feet. Crescent Park has larger lots. It's called R1 10,000, different from other neighborhoods because it's known for that. I mean, it's like an old neighborhood
Yeah.
that's been its traditional construction. And basically, you can look at each of these lots as individual, as Zuckerberg has, and it has been tradition. But if you take a position that these are all just one big compound, then it just becomes one gigantic lot, which in a sense would violate the spirit, and according to the ARB, the letter of the code
Yeah.
as it defines the single-family district here.
Yeah.
So-
When I think of something that's exceeding 20,000 square feet, just to play devil's advocate, I mean, I think of someone, say it is 60,000 square feet, I would think that that's sort of like inviting someone to build one gigantic palace in the middle and then having like little, sheds or accessory places around the outside. I don't think that having four houses that look like four houses necessarily violates the 20,000 square foot rule. And I think some people are making that point
Well,
in his defense.
it depends on whether or not you think it's a compound or not. I mean,
Yeah.
the way you're characterizing it, it's four different homes, and which would be legit under city laws. But if
Yeah.
if they're sprawling all over 60,000 plus space, the question is less what they look like and more what they're used like.
Yes.
So.
It's a very interesting question.
Yeah, and also if somebody was to build a palace, hypothetically in your example, there would be a whole other sorts of issues that would be considered. There would be the city's individual review process. There would be neighbors.
Well, I mean, I think that
there
would be
other
more
things.
clearly outlawed than
Yeah.
this. This is kind of, you can see it both ways.
But it just goes to show that you could outlaw both alternatives, which the ARB now has.
Yeah. Just to your point about the neighbors, I was reading a couple letters in the packet that was included. People are mostly concerned about construction, four homes being developed all at once, and how much noise and how long would that take. And,
Yeah.
some
they-
strong concerns there.
Yeah, and they addressed that at the meeting, like the consultants working on it. They had a pretty extensive plan for doing a lot of work off-site, kind of prefabricating elsewhere, bringing it in together, parking cars only on the properties, so there wouldn't be any spillover. So it does seem like, Zuckerberg's team did put in some thought into addressing these concerns.
Okay.
So.
All right.
You haven't had a lot of people at the meeting. Nobody was opposing it, which you frequently see it if there's some big mansion being developed.
Yeah.
So it seems like they put in quite a lot of thought, which was why it was a little surprising.
Yeah, so the staff recommended, ARB recommended denial, and now it's going to the Director of Planning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
For
So
a decision.
it's still a recommendation. I mean, the planning director could still say we approve it despite the ARBs, but it's unlikely, it's unusual, but many things in this process have been unlikely and unusual. So we'll just wait. We'll wait for the letter.
Okay. And then finally, we'll turn to, from really big houses to really small houses, not micro houses, we've learned. This is 2755 El Camino Real, the VTA lot at Page Mill and El Camino. There's a proposal for 60 apartments, but small apartments, but not micro apartments. We've
So
learned.
small, they're non-existent actually. But yeah. There would be 500 to 700 square feet.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Technically, like other cities are building micro units of 300?
250, 300.
Wow.
Yeah. So the council was cautiously endorsing it because they like housing, but there was a pretty clear divide, I thought, among the council members as to whether this is a good project just because it has housing, or it's only a good project if it has housing for specific types of people, right? Who was lining up where?
Well, in some cases, this was a case of usual suspects lining up in usual positions, but there was some nuance here which kind of shows how the conversation has shifted over the past year. Corey Walbeck and Mark Berman are pro-housing of any sort. More market rate housing is good. Below market rate is even better, but as much housing supply as we could bring, that would be the best thing. So they support it, especially if people in there are restricted from driving, which is an idea that surfaced. And I think people like Greg Scharf and Liz Niss also have pretty much lauded what it is, what was being proposed by Windy Hill Property Ventures, the 60 units, 30 studios, 31 bedroom. And on the other side of the spectrum, Karen Holman and Tom Du Bois were very kind of opposed to it because they don't like, because of zoning issues, basically. It's currently a parking lot that's zoned as public facility, which means it's one of the few sites where the city could actually like build a new animal shelter or whatever else it wants. That was Eric Filson's example. And so this would be like obvious spot zoning. You're zoning the site to accommodate a particular project. And so Karen Holman and Tom Du Bois were against it. Most of the other colleagues fell somewhere between the two poles. And I think Eric Filseth kind of represented that line, which is basically saying, this is an okay site for housing, but we need to make sure it has to be serving the workforce, people who otherwise would not be able to afford to live in Palo Alto. So he's not as far as Mark and Corey and any housing is good. This is only do this. We should only rezone public facility if we get high value for it.
We're pretty early in the process for this particular plan, right? And there was some discussion about whether or not the rental rates would be low enough for people to live in who can't normally live here. I mean, the ones, the apartment buildings close by, I think the lowest rental rate is about $2,500 there, and that's for an 860 square foot unit. And then, you know, something that's 3 bedrooms is $5,600 a month.
Yeah, I've seen prices for micro units being listed as $2,000, $2,500, $3,000 in some places, like in San Francisco. So, yeah, I mean that's a big wild card. I mean the developer said that the team said that they'd be willing to give priority to city workers, teachers, police officers, firefighters. But what they meant by giving priority is give them the first chance to sign up for these units.
Okay.
It's not clear if it means lower the rates so that actually afford them. And when asked about what these things will cost, the developer said, we don't know yet, we haven't gone that far in the process, this is just a pre-screening, so there were no specific numbers. So I do think, if they are going to go the route that this is going to be for people who can't afford to be in Palo Alto, they probably have to be BMR units.
Were any of the council members concerned about the impact on parking? I mean, when I was over at Keeble and Shuchat just yesterday, the owner, Terry Shuchat, was talking about that project in particular and saying, parking is already bad enough in this, the area near California Avenue, and he thought it was unrealistic that project wouldn't make that even worse.
Yeah, parking is a huge concern, precisely because this project is underparked. Basically, there's 60 units under city code. They would have to provide between 90 and 102 parking spaces. They're actually providing 45, so like half as much.
Wow.
So, some council members see that as good because because the idea is to de-restrict, and they are providing a bunch of other things for non-drivers like Caltrain passes, Eco passes,
Incentives.
bike share, 84 bike stops. They would have a TDM coordinator telling people how to get to the 22 bus across the street. I don't know what the person would do. But yeah, and it's not just the council members. Neighbors were very concerned. Like the Palo Alto neighborhoods sent out a letter basically urging denial because parking was a huge concern, especially for the Ventura neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a bigger one with all the things that are being built outside our office.
And then the spot zoning issue was also a big factor for the residents, right, who are coming out and against the project. Just the idea that there's no zoning there right now that would facilitate any kind of project like this.
But on the other hand, since right now it's a parking lot and it's PF, pretty much any development outside of a municipal facility would require spot zoning. So, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, unless you want to keep it a parking lot or build a fire station here or animal shelter.
Yeah.
It would have to be spot zoned, even though that is a dirty ward and obviously.
So are there actually any zoning designations that the city has that would allow this right now?
No.
Okay, so they'd have to create a zoning, or?
They would have to create a zone, or amend
PC
comprehensive
is
plan.
gone.
PC's gone. Yeah, the most units, I think RM40 is the densest zoning designation, which is 40 units per acre. And so I don't even think this site is an acre. It's less. So yeah, it would be far fewer. The density far exceeds anything that would be allowed in any residential zones.
All right, so council got a shot at it. Windy Hill Property Ventures is going to go off and refine their concept and then come back Does it come
Right.
back to the ARB, the Planning Commission?
I expect it's going to come back to council because
Council
this was a pre-screening session, which means that there were no votes and there's no feedback. I don't think there was a clear process because pre-screening is so early in the game that it's possible Windy Hill will decide, oh God, it's just not worth it, or they could continue. But certainly before anything's approved, it would go through all the bodies.
Okay.
Just not sure what the next step in the sequence would be.
All right, well, when that becomes clear, we'll have it in our paper.
Sure will.
And online. Thanks for the discussion today. And if you want to catch up on all the latest news in Palo Alto, visit our website, paloaltoonline.com, or catch us on Twitter at Palo Alto Weekly. That's it for this week on Behind the Headlines.